today. And so we have Patrick Errington, Abram, and Sam Elmi, and also Katie Griffiths. And it will be a joy to listen to all of your work, and to also we come up with the theme between places, because I know that some of you have traveled to quite a lot of places, or the places are not necessarily just geographical as well, but like make journeys essentially. And we'll be very interested to hear from you about that kind of what's between these journeys really, and what makes you as a poet that whom you are now. And so I will. So we will first have the reading, and then we will open up to questions and discussions. I think so. Let's start now, and let's welcome our first reader. So I have great pleasure to introduce Patrick James Errington, whose work I've admired quite a lot, over the years, and really enjoyed his work. And as many of you know, Patrick's poems have appeared in a number of magazines and anthologies worldwide, including Poetry Review, Boston Review, Oxford Poetry, Cincinnati Review, Harvard Review, and Best New Poets, as well as in the form of 2 excellent chapbooks, including Glean and Field Studies. His most recent awards include the 2020 Poetry International Prize and the Callan Gordon Award from the Scottish Book Trust. Patrick is also a translator, and his latest translations of the French-Romanian philosopher Émil Cioran notebooks forthcoming from New York Review of Books. Originally from Alberta, Canada, Patrick now lives in Scotland, where he teaches at the University of Edinburgh. So let's welcome Patrick. Thank you.
They don't make gods for non-believers. When I tell him I'm dying, my doctor says I'll die years and years from now if I'm careful, so I will. Die then, I say, but carefully. After all, if it's worth doing, then it's got to be worth doing carefully. And my doctor agrees. He should. All the same, you can be too careful, which is why I see him far less than is quote unquote prudent. My doctor, I mean, not God. Him, I see so much more than should a devout non-believer, but never where I expect to. Great storms, great losses, and the like. Rather in the pale residues left behind latex gloves or the soft patience of a painkiller. Maybe that's a sign I'm approaching the end. Or it may just be the perfunctory depression of my tongue again, the requisite ah, as though comprehending. But let's face it, comprehension's not the issue. I mean, I can comprehend like glass that light with all its grit and sign comes apart into color, but that hardly warms this halogen, hardly amounts to understanding. My doctor thinks his is a look of understanding with all that plastic wisdom of sign and symptom, but understanding nothing of mine. Between you, me, and my God, I've got a lot to cower from. Which I guess means I should put faith in one of us. But him I don't trust any more than my doctor, or me, or any more than anyone else so reliant on terror in their acolytes, shivering and braille-skinned, deaths confessed to and calendared. He laughs at my swithering, hands swaddled in the too white light, reading my body, asking who I'll speak to while I write this, kneeling, pages closing, more careful than hands on the bed. That's that one's for Wendy Law, who is a student of mine at Edinburgh last year, I believe, who requested that poem. And thinking of In Between Spaces, it was a poem that I wrote sort of thinking about an experience with with a friend of mine who was had Ewing sarcoma and was in and out of hospital, and I spent a bit of time with him there and thinking about doctors and gods. And this was in New York, but I tweaked the lexicon a little bit in order to slip in a Scottish word, swithering, which is one of my all-time favorite words. So that poem maybe is crossing between boundaries or something like that a little bit. Anyway, so the next poem I'm going to do is one of sort of two poems that are titled the same thing. Two poems that I actually wrote well before COVID, thinking mostly about these people in distant places like New York and Canada, where I grew up. But of course, I think in COVID days, it's taken on something of a slightly more eerie, prescient kind of thing that I wrote this before it, but suddenly it takes on new significance now, which I think so many things do. And there's an epigraph, which is one I invented, but I'll read it to you anyway. In quantum physics, it has been theorized that entangled subatomic particles might somehow affect one another without touching, regardless of the distance between them. Albert Einstein, in disbelief, called it spooky action at a distance. So this is spooky action at a distance. Rain hushing the last of the light. The sort that seems to touch everything, slate, lip, leaves, as if by touching it might leave one last thing this time untold. In the last, the word was tender. In the next, spared. In the last, lit flat across the street, I watch a couple wear their worn orbits around each other. He dries, she puts each thing away. Their hands never touch. Silence, a tide between. I think of my parents casting themselves like small coins into what seas they couldn't say. I couldn't say why I want to tell you this. Outside, a few drops drop in the gutters. My neighbors, I'll tell by lamplight and leavings. Bin bags piling on the pavement, post that clots the door, one word, one word, one word. One thing fitting always precisely between, like birdsong fits whatever quiet might come after this. Tell me there's just this world between us, that you're there, just on the other side, hands pressed to the cold of it. Can you feel that? Across the street and 3 floors below, a man stoops as he steps out, as if by stooping, he might somehow make the drops stop, head high. So I've developed a habit now, a thing that at all of my readings, I would like to read a poem by someone who is no longer with us or able to read poems themselves, just to bring someone else's voice into it and also to make me look bad by comparison. So I'm going to read a poem by a teacher of mine who was absolutely instrumental and whose work I will always just look up to, admire, and read pretty much every day. Her name was Lucy Brock-Broido, and she died in 2018, and it still seems so strange that she's gone. But her work sort of, continues to resonate with me. And so I'm going to read a poem of hers called You Have Harnessed Yourself Ridiculously to This World. Tell the truth, I told me, when I couldn't speak. Sorrow's a barbaric art, crude as a Viking ship, or a child who rode a spotted pony to the lake away from summer in the 1930s toward the iron lung of Poli. According to the census, I am unmarried and unchurched. The woman in the field dressed only in the sun. Too far gone to halt the Arctic cap's catastrophe. Big, beautiful, blubbery white bears, each clinging to his last hunk of ice. I am obliged now to refrain from dying for as long as it is possible. For whom left am I first? We have come to terms with ourselves, like a marmoset getting out of her great ape suit. My all-time favorite images of marmoset in a suit. I don't know how she thought of that. That's really the one problem with doing that is now I find it really hard to follow any of Lucy's poems. How do you live up to that? So I'm going to dive in with a brand new poem, whereas brand new is I think my work gets. I don't write very much, so I haven't read this one before. So please go easy on me. I'm still sort of figuring it out. And this poem is a bit about Alberta, where I grew up, the prairies, this sort of big open spaces that that you had big booms a long time ago and are sort of starting to, well, the oil boom seems to be wearing away, which is obviously a good thing environmentally, but not so good for the people there. This poem is called What Gives, which is a phrase that I've always found so intriguing. I love when kids say, oh, what gives, man? So this is What Gives. I can hear them, but only just make them out. The kids slouching there at the far end of the one long road, the long end of the light. Sunlight, dust, more than enough to wear away whatever pull this town might have had once. Signs of, call it life, colors, clues. I have no fucking clue why I keep coming back, year after year, not drawn here, not driven, but each night I dream of rivers, water taking whatever will give of the ground. This ground, this town, hell, it'll give, has given everything. And those kids there, shoulders set against another for-sale shop front, I can't even tell which is holding up which. But something must. This place, my place, and the wind off the mountains, giving way the wideness of the world. Something that's being charitable, I know. But I'll give it that. I'll give. So the next poem I'm going to read is also a sort of new poem, the only poem that I have, and hopefully the only poem that I will write that is directly to do with COVID in any particular way. But hopefully it's not all as bleak as this past 2 years have been. It's called Measures of Containment. I'm flickering through yet another dozen odd pictures, posts, reposts, boasting all the things that can be done while staying home. Virtually anything, apparently. DIY, sourdough, stay home, save lives. Each life displayed in its little box, each loss in its careful counted characters. And sometimes I worry that so much can be contained like this in a screen, a home, a poem maybe. The way a body can be said to contain its pain, everything you are in a lifetime, meaning in a word, and for whatever reason, I wish and wildly to let it out just once. Let life exceed the body that lives it. Let wild, let the line, this line maybe reach just a bit too far to the, what if I've got the word wrong? What if it's not so much in, but maybe through? And by through, I mean less in one side, out the other, less beyond than by way of, or maybe even with. For whatever reason, I wish and wildly for a way of reaching out to you, a hand with which to tell you that whatever it is, whatever you are going through right now, you can, you will live through this. I'm going to do just 2 more poems here. Thanks so much for all the comments. Sorry, I've not been looking at that. I really appreciate it. Also, thank you all so much for coming. I know it's a glorious day out in Edinburgh. I don't know where you are, but it's a nice day to be outside. But I really appreciate you being inside with us today. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing the other poets advantage of going first is I can do it without the nerves. Sorry, everyone. So I'm going to do two more poems. The first of these two is going to be the companion piece to the first Spooky Action at a Distance poem, which is fittingly also called Spooky Action at a Distance. For days, it seemed like it would rain, though it never did. The fraying October sky all agrasp as if in a foreign language, as if soil and slate and skin were terms it had learnt once in grade school maybe and unpracticed forgot. I'm forgetting who it was I meant to tell this to. Words coming bit by bit apart against the air. I can feel whole vocabularies of you just there, past this language, this line. I've heard it said that one particle can feel another turning even on opposite ends of the universe. And I hold to that as something like hope, as if somehow just wondering might be enough. Days like these, I can't help but wonder about my mother, about the wince that flickered across her face when I raised my hand, leaving to wave goodbye. She used to tell me how much I had come to look like him, my father, and I do, though we left him whole lives ago, as if I'd grown like sharp wood into the wound of him. Bare elms fit to each flaw in the sky. The sky tonight is clear and irrevocable. Each and everything laid out beneath it like heirloom silverware. Tell me, whoever you are, tell me you've saved one small vow of you. In a window across the street, a woman I'll never meet lights a single naked lamp, and all the stars go out. So yes, I'm going to do one more poem. Thank you so much, Jenny, and thank you all for listening. It's really exciting to have another night of poetry and to be able to hear people reading it again. I feel like I've really missed that in COVID days. The sort of community, I think, that comes around poetry, the people that support each other and celebrate each other's work. It's lovely that you do this and that you organize these things, Jenny, and it's much appreciated. So thank you. This last poem is the very last poem in the manuscript, the collection that I'm working on, that I'm hopefully someday soon will come out. The poem is called Never Say Never Say Never. But here we are, here where the page ends, hidebound, handheld, and welled with sleep. Morning. Little left to say, to sing, to let cling, words like leaves, like children. Always, eventually, a last time. All fathers someday set their daughters on their feet, never pick them up again. They flock your skin, nevers, slip like weather off the wing, like the pale aftertouch gives up to color. What is there to do then? But keep touching. It's not too much to ask. To leave just one choice unmade, still warm, a last page unread, a wild wish, wild and unwaited for, one small promise kept back. Last night's rain is pearling the spruce, the timothy, but don't wait, not just yet. I'll glaze our will not be's in lake-long syllables until they're smooth and semi-precious. I'll set stones along your body. And when you wake, leave lightly. When you leave, come back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for this such wonderful, brilliant poetry. You know, like especially the new poems that you've read to us. It's just, yeah, it's such an honor to hear them as well. And I have no doubt that the manuscript would be, you know, like a very, you know, like the lucky. I don't know who is the lucky publisher, but so thank you so much for And I'm sure that we'll have lots of questions also that we wanted to kind of reflect on your work later on. And so we'll come to our next reader, Jill, and for a second. Jill, thank you very much for coming to join us and read. As many of us know, Jill is the director of Malika's Poetry Kitchen, a collective encouraging craft and community and development. And actually, Malika's Kitchen is now in its 20th anniversary this year, very special. And so Jill grew up in Manchester and she traveled the world, but now lives in Brixton. She has performed her poems across London and in many other places and countries, including Ledbury Poetry Festival, StAnza, Paris, and the States. And her publications include in the Rialto, Magma, Poetry Scotland, Poetry Wales, Ink, Sweat and Tears, and Other Poems and Harana poetry. Jill produces and presents a lot of poetry events herself, including the Stablemates series. And she is a world expert in making sound effects for radio, comedy, and drama, which is amazing. Thank you very much, Jill, and welcome.
Thanks, Jenny. Jenny asked us before she let you all in from the waiting room if we had any preference where we went in the running order, and I was trying to be, you know, really amenable. I'm like, no, anything you want. And of course, as soon as Patrick started, I realized I should have gone first, then I wouldn't have had to follow any of the other three. So here I am, I'll do my best. So I've taken the theme of tonight's evening, Between Places, quite literally as we start. And when I was 22, I went to Australia for 3 months. And when I came back, I knew I just wanted to go back and travel there for a year, but I was stuck in Trafford Park working in an industrial estate. And so this poem is very much between two places of Manchester and Australia. It's called Chasing Rainbows. I am trekking in the arid centre where willy willies live terracotta dust onto my skin to stick by sweat, kilned by sun, until I am clay bound. I used to get stuck in the same traffic jam at the same motorway junction every morning. Swimming in gentle aquamarine among kaleidoscopes of coral and fish, alongside soft white sand strolled over by soldier crabs. I arrived in the office in the concrete block in the industrial park after Robert and Peter. Henry came next, then Tim, who brewed up. Tramping through tropical jungle, avoiding roots, stinging leaves and webs where spiders which could cover your face lurk in hope of smaller prey. Canteen lunch was roast shepherd's pie, sausages, stew and fish on Fridays. Rafting down a river, bumping off rocks, seeing flashes of electric blue as Ulysses butterflies open their wings. I drank a lot of coffee to break up the day with trips across utilitarian grey carpet to the kitchenette and the toilet. Standing on a cliff which drops to the sea, the beach widens as the escarpment retreats from the ocean. We went to the White Hart together every Friday as if we would miss each other over the weekend. Surfing out to sea across foaming breakers, fighting wind and tide to reach the far horizon. It took 33 hours on a cheap flight with 7 stops in 5 countries and 3 continents. As I expand into the spaces of this country, I realise I need to stretch this much to get back to where I started and to start again. Thanks. I don't think you get much more between places than with bridges. So here's a bridges poem. It's a London poem. I haven't got many of those. Proud Northerner, you know. Crossings. I admired engineering, seeing bascules lift, breaking the road. Only frustrated if I couldn't see the vessel holding us up when we drove over Tower Bridge. London Bridge gives a better view, although I miss going under those stone-clad arches. Battersea looks at Chelsea and Albert cables strung with lights so every night could be Christmas. Vauxhall keeps secrets. Great bronze women of achievement on its piers. Westminster and Lambeth have their palaces almost facing each other on opposite banks. So many ways we could reach each other, but you won't even approach the river. I went to the Isle of Man a couple of years ago with a friend who was keen on trains. So we went north one day and south another day, and there are quite a lot of binaries in the Isle of Man that I discovered. So this poem that I wrote there is called Yin and Yang on the Isle of Man. Slate sea under low morning cloud has patches of shimmering steel where sun breaks through. Beside the electric railway track, ferns cohabit with fuchsias, hebes with hawthorn and heather. Natives mingle with the cultivated. The train rattles north and up Snaefell. It's blustery at the summit. Blue sky above and sea below match hydrangeas here, and smit marks on sheep clip a contour still fresh. By late afternoon at Laxey Beach, the water is deep jade, with frills of ecru lace where tiny waves break on shortbread sand. Back at the Douglas terminus, tramway horses are done for the day. Sun drops, the ocean is charcoal. Tomorrow, the steam train will chuff and puff south. They say hydrangeas there are pink. Which people are more in between places than refugees and migrants? This ghazal is called First Generation. It's safer to cry at stories of other people than my own. I'm guiltily grateful to other people. Émil may drown, he's left war and a wife. The boat brims with aspirant, desperate people. Ahmad can't breathe in the back of a truck, loaded like freight in a part load of people. Yolanda walks north through deserts, not knowing she'll lose her children. He tweets, not these people. Duar's house bombed, family gone, she starves. When world powers play, their pawns are poor people. Eliud lives in a camp where cholera has dehydrated 1,000 people. Salma sells herself for survival to men who see her as other than people. Paulette's generation has lived here for decades, still being deported, the wrong kind of people. Grandpa fled pogroms, went west on a train. Now I shed tears at the tales of my people. I'm hearing a bit of background noise. Is there anybody perhaps who isn't muted? So I too am from immigrant stock, refugees. My parents escaped pogroms in Lithuania about 110 years ago. And it was quite hard for us to track our family history, certainly before the opening up of the Eastern Bloc. And so I used to borrow stories of my family history from fictions, films and books and things like that. This next poem refers to that. And I had just seen the film again, however many times. And then I saw something on the news and it just took me straight to that film. Like a fiddler on the roof. My grandfather came from a shtetl in the Pale, Anatevka, maybe. I never knew his stories, adopted those of Tevye the dairyman. At the end of the movie, expelled from their intimate, obstinate, dear little village, the Jews go on foot to find landslide and safer places. Books and Shabbos candlesticks carried in baskets and cases. heads covered in hats or scarves, shawls across backs. Last summer, the news showed a colourful straggle walking through Hungary, holding plastic bags and mobile phones, alongside cars and trucks on multi-lane motorways, past rolls of razor wire, under gantries with signs to hoped-for places. It did not show whether they reached Vienna, whether they walked all the way, were welcomed. So that's the paternal side, and my grandparents went to South Africa, where my dad grew up, and he came here after the war. And so there was languages used in my house, in my family, that I knew that other people around me didn't use. And sometimes I didn't always know what language they were. So Dad was from South Africa, so there were some Afrikaans words. And because we were Jewish, there's some Yiddish words and Hebrew words. In fact, there's one word that I always thought was Afrikaans, and I discovered very recently that it's actually Yiddish. So this poem is called Father Tongue. The sweetest nachos I ever ate were bought on the roadside from a barefoot boy in tatty shorts and a t-shirt with a hole below Man U. He looked younger than me at 10. I couldn't believe he'd seen my home team, even though I'd flown 18 hours to where he and my dad were born. He took Dad's coin with both hands and a smile which lifted his eyes. He waved at me as we drove away, slowly, so our wheels didn't spit dust over him. Whenever I peel a tangerine, I see him. I let juice linger in my mouth while I consider the Afrikaans word I never heard in England, except in our house. My dad spent the last years of his life between places, not physically. This poem will explain. Another time, another place. I picked figs and plums off the trees in Auntie's garden and popped them straight into my mouth. I played in her swimming pool with my sisters, fought my big boy cousin for the inflatable chair. I don't know who lives there now that she has gone. Her son is across an ocean. We are on another continent. My dad, the last of their generation, lives even further away in a world of his own. I'm going to give you another poem about my dad. He died in September 2012. And in the Jewish tradition, you mark the anniversary according to the Hebrew calendar, the Jewish calendar, not the solar calendar. And it's his yahrzeit next week. So here's another poem for him. Excuse me. It's called Who Needs Souvenirs? Even my sisters acknowledge I have the best taste in ties. Dad always asked me to choose one for special occasions. Buying him presents was easy. Silk, soft colours, subtle patterns if not plain. My favourite was one I bought in Bali. Lustrous sky blue, not narrow, not wide. He slopped his soup. Mum washed it to save on dry cleaning, ruckled sheen and shape. I have no keepsakes from his 40-year career, but secretaries told me they heard complaints about everyone but him. No golf trophies, but I was his teenage caddie. Sometimes he let me have a go. Few photos of him, lots taken by him. But in my treasure box is a ruined blue silk tie. So I think I've got time for just one more. And it's another Between Places poem. Well, aren't they all tonight? This one in yet a different way. I joined 2 different youth clubs when I was a teenager. They couldn't be more different from each other. So thanks again to Jenny for inviting me and setting up this evening. Thanks to the poets, and thanks to all of you who've come along to listen. I'll finish with How to Belong. At Jewish Youth Club, We all wore Rock Against Racism badges and danced to Glad to Be Gay, girls in one ring, boys in another. They ate ham sandwiches when their parents weren't looking, yet scorned me for smoky bacon crisps and going to school on Yom Kippur. The evangelicals lured us into their church hall with ping pong, then tried to keep us with singing and prayers and Jesus. They wanted all of us.
Thank you very much, Jill. That's brilliant. And it kind of makes us know you're so much more, like all these poems that traveled places and different languages and different homes, different people. It's brilliant. And yes, I thought I know you, but now I kind of like have all these like new stories that I think I'm really curious about. Thank you. Awesome. And so our next reader, wow, what a good, amazing, impressive set of poets. So our next reader is Sam. Sam Elmi is a poet, and he's a PhD candidate as well, and he works also in education. His writing plays in the liminal spaces between racial and social cultural, as well as political identity claims. He has been shortlisted for the Venture Award, the Complete Works too, a New Generation African Poets, and he's a graduate of the Young Inscribed Mentoring Program. Sam's poems have appeared in many places, including Poetry Review, Magma, Iota, Ink, Sweat and Tears, Myths of the Near Future, Scarf, Echoing Gallery, Cataverine. And Sam's portrait of Colossus, Flip-Eyed, 2021 was selected as the Poetry Book Society's Summer Pamphlet Choice this year. So let's welcome Sam.
Hi, thank you for that. Yeah, thank you to everybody for coming today, this evening. Is my microphone loud enough? Have I corrected the problem? Yeah, good, cool. So I'm going to launch into some new poems that I've not read before, and then I'll do some from the pamphlet. And this one's a bit of a sequence in 3 parts, and it's after Anna Karina Nietzsche, who's actually in this Zoom session with us. So, A Darker Light 1. There is much to be said about moths, how a caterpillar feeds on its own flesh, and the trust it takes to eat yourself, uncertain of the resurrection. Imagine a caterpillar when it sees the brown spotted wings of an angel, ascension of dead siblings risen, lifting their second lives towards a paradise that, from the caterpillar's vantage, are visible flickering Valhallas. It breaks my heart that the worms have no idea what awaits them. I wonder if it's because cannibals lose their mother tongues, forget their past lives, the blind faith of that gruesome womb. There is much to be said about a moth who, in the absence of memory, floats instinctively toward the nearest heaven, and I want to call it a neon heaven, but that would limit the signal to fraudulence, omit the danger. There is much to be said about the intention to circumambulate at the first sign of fire, again and again, a distorted ritual, gnarling all that was beautiful, those injured wings, until one by one these angels fall, and still there is much to be said of it all. 2. A mother asked her child, "What did you memorize?" "Hands," said the child, astaghfirullah, the faint scent of musk that will never mask the stench of animal fat in beards, astaghfirullah, and the beard itself, 1,000 tasers cling to nerves, the clinging, astaghfirullah, how agony paralyzes the soul. A child memorizes that too. Eyes of narrow focus, the panting, astaghfirullah, ablutions they make for others, how quick to lift a thobe, how they keep the word of God on those tongues, and a memorized sermon. Those who leave our congregation are condemned, which is why a child's mother will send them back again and again. Astaghfirullah. 3. The this papacy of fools and all its Borgia popes have wearied me. I drag metal for miles in the sand again and again, searching for the land of promise. And the Lord said there will come a time of remembrance, after which a time of loss, when no one will remember how to find me. I can't place us. Our maps have smudged, for we were never taught the North Star. We pick one out at random and walk, while they prune their beards, drunk with the dazzle of gold brocade, the weight of the robes they buy with our indulgences. The clatter of coins deflates the last draw of breath you kept for yourself. And if this is the last straw, the one that broke the back, I put it to you, it was not a straw, but a switch, and not the sort you flick on or off, though it feels as binary and as easy. A flick of the wrist, swish, which in Arabic is onomatopoeic and has always stood for abd. In Medina, an old man sliced me with it. I salvaged what I could of the wing and nibbled and ate, while he wrapped himself up tight and said the prayers for eating and hatching. ADHD. Tie as leash, child as feral, home as kennel, as sanatorium, this as rehab, tears as rattling, this as cold turkey, ADHD as white man bullshit, radiator as anchor, ankle as boat, ADHD as bad behavior, tie as love. Where is it now? Yes. The snail. I mean, the analogy writes itself like the onion in a grand conceit, though we really are like two slugs in a derelict mausoleum. Google snails are dangerous, slow, destroying my garden, our jobs and our women. You who cannot speak snail wouldn't understand how the shell was the gift and curse of diaspora, how our songs and laments resound in our half-remembered houses that we carry to forget to carry on. Let's read a couple more from the new stuff. Etymologies. 1. Albion. Albion, as in al-bayun, the in-between, is all I hear when you scream at me from across the parapet. Bayun, you and I, this stitch of brown in turf is Albion, soaked and distending. And Bayun, the earth and the sky, rainbows that may or may not appear. Bayun are faintly whispered losses. Albion, as in purgatory, or perhaps an oasis, or mirages in the sand, the cruelest state in limbo. To think for a moment that the in-between could be anything but Albion, could be anything but a home. 2. Gauls. I think of concentric circles, Vercingetorix, a siege within a siege ad infinitum, until the distinctions between them, a Caesar and a chieftain, is reduced to shades in between the echoes of dinosaurs and the wind. Gaul, somewhere about the guts, stomach for a fight that shouldn't be won, as in Gal, a foreigner in the land of her birth, as in bile, yellow belly, as in coward, the gall to run in circles, a vacuum, a hollowed out void held up to the night, all cultish like the night that crept up and swallowed everything. I'll do one more then from the new stuff and then go to the collection. The Fear, after Miguel Algarin. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but I probably haven't. I'm really bad with that sort of thing. 1. Sometimes I fear crossing the ever so thin line. Such is the fear I daren't look down, and my crutch can barely hold its own. A crushed roach rolls, and I can taste both it and the lips that pursed, paused. I juggle these doubts and witness the years it takes from the slipped. In this milieu, a single misstep will vagabond you. Sometimes I spot the same glint in my son's eyes, and all I hear is crashing water, our bodies falling out of the sky. 2. Sometimes along the quayside, my son walks up ahead unburdened, and I know I must have walked like this, a skater on a frozen lake. I take this picture and store in place of the memory that time or smoke or a knock on the head rubbed until erasure. One day I'll wonder how I came to watch myself, how I came to watch my gliding self through the eyes of my father, out of body, out of mind. Sometimes along the quayside, we pass a fellow burning. I go to pinch my nose, but it's too late. I'm inhaled in the trail of smoke. A tail wags the head and lifts the dead by inches. I am stopped here in other dimensions, and I can't see how far my son will jolly on for. I really hope you don't mind, but I don't usually smoke, but I do when I'm nervous, and I'm bloody nervous. So I'm gonna have a cigarette. Terrible habit. Portrait of Colossus as an immigrant after Plath. I picture him fixed in stride across wandering oceans, a bridge reluctant between immovable banks, wedged like a fallen tree, an angel. It's a footing that keeps him sentinel and sleepless, knowing a slip in the east is all it takes to bring him to his knees, then face down into Rome. I want to scale his limbs, sit in the brass of his ear, whisper on the similitudes of the world, how at such great heights, all language is a blur, people indistinguishable as fields of corn, sand. But he's all eyes on the water, its movement and liberty, the trick of being everywhere at once. Diaspora. For Hadrawi, who's commonly referred to as the Somali Shakespeare. I don't quite agree with that, but he's a damn fine poet anyway. Maybe even better than Shakespeare, who knows, but if you can even make those kind of comparisons. But anyhow, diaspora. For Hadrawi, if poetry should remain our propagule, what is the language of diaspora? Teach us a poem of infinite translation. Help us reach beyond our confines like the wind that ripped us from the maple and scattered us on winged Samara, from Amsterdam to Oklahoma, in the ever-spreading shadows of our Babel. The Invaders. John Townend, former Conservative MP, happened to go to the same school that I was at, some 30 years in between. But it's interesting that he went to the same school anyway, because I don't think it changed much in those 30 years, unfortunately. The invaders. Oh, well, he said, sorry, England must be reconquered for the English. They should go back from whence they came. That was pretty important for me to mention that first. So, the invaders. I am parrot's feather, pennywort, water fern and primrose. I am the surus of grey squirrels in the branches by our windows. I carry crayfish plague through fenland wash and highland stream. My thick roots tear at the bedrock under country lane and tower block. I am a London gang of parakeet. The coipus close to you as skin. The sand that beds your cobbled streets. Things will never be the same again. And yet England is home. So England, in lieu of a detailed taxonomy, the names of trees I camped beside, in lieu of a firm footing, is the solemn recognition that I know you more than everywhere else put together. Not quite belonging, but the closest I will come to finding my home is walking alone at the end of the night over Parliament Bridge, past Nelson's Column, up to Camden, up and up until at Hampstead, where the first impressions of dawn are the songs of birds whose names I never had to learn for them to sing for me. So good up then. I should really learn where the poems are in this pamphlet before I attempt to do a reading. The Hope and Anchor, great little pub. An imam stands where the last barmaid called last orders, his jukebox of Aidan and Ayat, his little number. Worshippers squeeze into rank and row face Mecca as once punters rasping for that one for the road made a beeline for the last picture. Now empty beer lines still clipped to walls, snaked to a cellar parched with prohibition, where once the fount was stocked with cask and cork, now a beer garden bench for Elif, Ba, Ta. Stalagmites reach for the ghost of a liquor bottle rack. You can hear the ghost of Jim Beam through the palimpsest, and a wooden sign above the door, the Hope and Anchor, which the imam kept, a portly reminder that God's house is Al-Amal wa Marsa, that others have gathered here to escape until last orders. I'll do two more, and thank you very much for the invitation to read and for listening. Your mother is in a different language. The words of this language are to refer to what can be known only to the speaker, to his immediate private sensations, so another cannot understand the language. That was Wittgenstein. Your mother is in a different language. It didn't matter when she took her oath of burden, placenta, and breast milk, her promise of patience and insomnia that she clung to for 7,000 nights of drifting in and out of speechlessness. No one saw the nurse sever the umbilical cord, your first and last line of unbroken communication, tossed into a medical waste bin. The doctor muttering fate instructions in English for the nurse to rock you asleep with lullabies your mother couldn't understand. No one thought it odd that mother and son should bring a translator to parents' evening, to bridge between their broken tongues, the swirling cacophony of Warmhuleyahi, and what's she on about? Making it easier to just kiss her forehead in silence. How did you get here? 15 years of false start, sat together in a courtroom, an unbridgeable gulf, your mother shaping words like a prayer, except that Hoyo Mahatsamesi isn't a prayer. It's a question you can't answer in a language she understands. And the last, actually, I don't think I've got time for that one, so I'll call it there. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam, for such a brilliant poems. And as you can tell from the responses on the chat, if you have time to later look at them, yeah, we're all really drawn into your world of poetry and you know, feelings, and very complex, and you know, it just kind of makes you reflect on how you know, people or poets and the kind of how they, you know, like reflect on society, on many social issues and history. Thanks again. Wow, so what an evening, and I hope that yeah, you're all enjoying it. And so now we're here to also welcome our final reader, Katie Griffiths. And Katie, she grew up in Ottawa, Canada, in a family originally from Northern Ireland. And Katie came second in 2018 National Poetry Competition, and her pamphlet, My Shrink is Pregnant, was a winner in Life Cannon's pamphlet competition. She was published in Primus by 9 Arches, and her first collection, The Attitudes, was published in April this year. Just such a brilliant collection, and I hope that everyone make sure that you have a copy. Was published by 9 Arches Press, and she's a member of Malika's Kitchen, Poetry Kitchen, and Red Door Poets as well. Not to mention that she's a singer-songwriter in the band A Woman in Goggles. Thank you, and welcome, Katie.
Oh, thank you so much, Jenny. It's absolutely wonderful. It's such an honor to be here tonight with Patrick and Jill and Sam. Thank you, you wonderful poets, for what you've read tonight. Thank you, Jenny, so much for the brilliant theme for this evening. When I was thinking about it, there's a wonderful phrase in Spanish, and I think it's similar in other languages. I know French has this phrase too, and it's a phrase that describes dividing your time between two places. And in Spanish, it's vivir a caballo, which means to live on horseback. So they might say, instead of saying she or he divides his time between London and Edinburgh, the Spanish might say he or she lives on horseback between London and Edinburgh. And I think that's just such a wonderful summary of everything. It's a symbol of just constantly galloping between things. It might be geographical locations, psychological states of mind, the past and the present. So in a sense, we're all on horseback between something. I'm really thrilled to actually meet Patrick this evening, who a fellow Canadian, and he'll understand as much as any of us who have grown up one place but find ourselves somewhere else, this amazing tug between what we knew and what we know now. My childhood in Canada, I had amazing cold winters in the province of Ontario. And one of the things I've always regretted is never being able to give my English children the chance to experience those winters. I wrote a poem which is actually for them, but it's a kind of a reversal, because the poem is called The Winter Inside My Mother. Winter was never nailed down, would slip from my mother like an expletive that had her reverting to 40 below, trolling wastes of blizzard-bent woods. Evenings, stretched out on our sofa, she'd place her toes, lunatic with cold, to burn in my lap. And I pictured her in stinging drifts, horse scald on her face, nearly a corpse, yet scavenging berries for a child, growled to life in the gaping white. Always the Hibernian in her, to worship snowfall, to cover her tracks. And if I could say she ever found her way back intact, it was only to bequeath the ice melt stain in the bureau drawer, with snapshot of her party trick, to stand out on the road, join a line of leafless maples, and simply go bare. Jill mentioned that one of the great symbols of betweenness or betweendom is, of course, a bridge. Another overriding symbol of this might be a door, the thing that stands between here and there. So my next poem is written to a door. Door, my tribe. It's said you keep the peace. I study you for balance. Will you never take my side? Even as I duly write your essays, door as keyhole surgery, door as false memory. Did you know that in the vestibule of door makers, competition is unhinged? Let's take a drive to Doors Are Us and remind ourselves that in our own lifetime, 95% of doors remain unopened. Face up to it, door. Both ingrained, we are not so different. I have played the understudy to the door that played the understudy to the iron railings, that played the understudy to all the gates of hell. Of course, speaking of hell, and why not? In Christian biblical terms, there's nothing that symbolizes, and indeed Sam mentioned it, the state between hell and heaven, which of course is purgatory, that kind of everlasting limbo. And ad infinitum, which was a wonderful phrase that Sam also mentioned. Purgatory. Wriggling souls are migratory, hoping the state is transitory, lightning lost in a multi-story, or confined to a dormitory where all's forbidden, not participatory, no chance to be exploratory. Whether they finesse it into allegory, the clamor to leave grows to a furore, heard evermore, that old sob story. Well, purgatory is a word we often use to describe an unbearable state. And why? Because it's a state that we can imagine carrying on without ever ceasing, without any alleviation or respite, a constant unending. A place where we might be searching for the land of promise, which again, Sam mentioned in one of his poems. I wonder too if a disjoint, the disjoint that sometimes can occur between body and mind is precisely an in-between space in which things like addictive behaviors can occur, a place where these behaviors can seed themselves in a kind of a fracture. A number of the poems in my collection, the Attitudes, there are a few poems that form a sequence and which runs as a thread throughout the collection. And they're called Dough Must Not Enter the Body. And they address an uncomfortable relationship with eating and food. Dough must not enter the body, number 1. One summer, she learned how to eat, not to swallow, just spit, crouch with jam pastries and a paper bag. She ate herself down to the cellar. Each night painted a portrait of a harlot with lopsided hat that grew with each mistake. One botched eye had to go, hidden by an extended brim. Daytimes, balled against ribs of a wooden rowboat, she'd drift with the current, invisible to shore, trying to occupy less space, yet at the same time disturb it more. For wasn't that the trick? Wasn't that the communion wafer's trick on the tongues of the pious? To dissolve, disappear, do the holy work. Dough must not enter the body, number 4. Her belly is the barometer she touches each day. It can be empty as a plundered well, a ransacked house of bickering selves, or full as a basket of laundry, a grain store for the unknown road, taut armor to fend off all blows. Mostly, her belly is a castle keep, her face in the window, disheveled. Dough must not enter the body, number 6. The shadow inflates, the body negates. The shadow defies, the body decries. The shadow unclenches, the body blenches. The shadow is blessed, the body suppressed. The shadow in sun, the body outdone. Of course, the biggest place that we all live between, all of us, and we all share it, is that long, we hope it's long, space between birth and death. And I think perhaps when we are nearing death or are experiencing the nearness of death in a loved one, that time that we try and have between, we try and extend it in some way. We try and make it even more momentous, perhaps. My last 2 poems, and I was just thinking, Patrick was mentioning doctors and gods. So this first one of these final 2, Patrick, this is for you. But my last 2 poems are 2 different takes on that sort of timing. One out of every 8 visitors attends the wrong hospital deathbed. Sublimating in blankets, she is all but ghost, riding out the groan of the mechanical mattress in her backwater room, the implausible language I once woke up hearing. Hard to twist it to lullaby, bastardized Irish I never got my tongue around, or to step in, practical, with stay, or go, or I'm sure your daughter didn't mean it. She seizes my index finger. Never has a digit been so adored. I disengage, take the spare folded sheet from the bedside locker and cut with manicure scissors 2 holes for eyes I shall spook first. My never mother's skull is a last stand on the pillow. A mouth of pointy teeth glints, generous to the ploy. Fiath, she whispers. Is it yourself? Just before my last poem, thank you again, Jenny, for inviting us to take part. It's been absolutely wonderful. And in our idleness, we compare hands. He says, exorcism improves flexibility of the hands. Hands clarify, throw light. I say, but hands are heavy duty. They drag their body behind. And did he know, first cousin to a hand is not a foot, but a rake. Let the earth prepare. He says, to focus the disintegrating mind, you must place 2 fingers on the person's eyes before you raise the eyelids. I say, my fingers are too stiff from questions. He says, it's a pastoral emergency. He keeps a collection of items his clients have spat out, keys, nails. I say, I keep a magnifying glass to study my hands, their wrinkling, a new ordinance of skin. He says he saw 4 strapping men struggle to hold down a young girl. I say, I held my father close those last minutes before his hands dropped, like starfish learning the ocean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie, for your wonderful poems. And, you know, like they just kind of make us really think about the kind of complex relationship between the body and the mind. And as you say, like the places can be, I mean, can be more than physical spaces, but emotional states and states of well-being. And thanks again to everyone, all the poets, the wonderful poets, for your work. And I can see like totally that there's so much dialogue in between all these poems, and I know that like, and also in between languages sometimes as well, how, you know, in between these relationships that are contained in these poems. Thank you. So I guess like we can maybe open up to different questions from the audience, and also, you know, in case any poets that if you would like to have a conversation with each other. I suppose many of your work actually talk about quite unsettling feelings. Or even though that maybe like let's say some relocation or family relationships, they may be out of personal choices, or they may be something that just arise from circumstances or unpredictable changes. So when you write about these words, these, you know, unsettling feelings or experiences, I wonder how do you kind of channel or translate these feelings, or rather abstract feelings, or kind of maybe contradictory feelings, and put them, you know, into a narrative of some sort, or lyric. You know, how do you choose the shape of your poem? It's like, you know, lyrical, narrative, or, you know, being more experimental. Such a hard choice. And I wonder, how do you you know, what's your creative process that usually guides you when you want to write about the uncomfortable? Anyone? You know.
Well, I think for me, the stuff just comes out. I just write it. I'm quite a direct person. I write it as it is. And you know, one of the rules in Kitchen is that when you're writing, when you're doing a first draft, turn off the editor, get it all out there, and then you come back to it later with your editing head on and form it, or, you know, rewrite it or whatever. Most of my poems, not all, but the majority of my poems probably end up fairly similar to, in structure, to how they first come out. But I did versification with Mimi, and she said that when you start a poem, don't, you know, you might have the first stanza that's in a particular form, but don't assume that's the form for the rest of the poem. And, you know, we all know that thing that you get rid of the first stanza and the last one anyway. So keep writing, and the form might be somewhere in the middle, not necessarily in that first stanza.
Thank you. Thanks, Jill. It's a very good tip, actually. Kind of expecting change, or for it to grow organically. Any other comments? Or
I think for me, anyways, I find that I don't often know what I'm writing about until quite a ways into the thing. That most of my process, such as it is involves like convincing myself at no point am I sitting down to write a poem. I am making notes. I get images, things sort of come, you write them down, and then at a later point, I've got enough of them, and I sort of go, oh, there's a poem here. And then I realize at that point, oh, this is what it's about. This is what it's about. This is what it's doing. This is the way it's working. But at no point did I go, okay, I'm going to write a poem today. I find that so daunting. I think the idea of writing a poem, I mean, all of you other poets out there, there's so many wonderful poets and so many incredible things that have been written, that to try and sort of just to think that I could say anything within that huge tradition is just overwhelming. And so I think just writing notes and sort of going, oh, I'm not writing a poem, I'm just making some notes. It gets me through that. And then only later do I figure out what the poem is, or that it is a poem, if it is.
Yeah, I really like that backdoor method of getting to a poem that you're describing, Patrick, and kind of sneaking up on it, and or it letting itself sneak up on you. Perhaps that's a way of putting it. I find with the things that I'm writing that might be difficult or whatever, I have to just play around loads and loads and loads. I have reams of stuff, and I've gone through so much paper, I'm ashamed to say, and things in the waste paper basket. But I think what can happen, and it must happen to so many of us and people watching who are poets as well, that there might be a line that leaps out, and then you realize, that's the entry point. You find the entry point, and then everything else might fall away, and you might have to just keep on writing. But can be just happenstance or some kind of happy collision of two thoughts, or something as easy as that.
I've been trying to move away from the idea that we as artists truly create anything, and moving more from a describing myself as a creative to admittedly rather pretentiously, but it works for me to describe myself more as a receptive or a perceptive, because it's so subconscious. The poems that are worth keeping, the songs that are worth keeping, the you know, the riffs on the guitar, whatever it might be, they seem to just fall out of the sky. And then, you know, the work you do to develop your craft and your voice as a poet filters that essential gift, I'd say. But for me, it's very, very shamanic. I think that, you know, and poets will describe it in very similar terms without perhaps being so esoteric with the language, but it works for me anyway. I don't feel like, you know, you hear people say, get yourself out the way of the poem, you know, let the poem happen. And again, you know, we seem to be describing very similar phenomena. We're just vessels, and I guess improve as in the more conscious, you know, tools of craft, etc. as you go along. But you know you're a poet before you know what a poem is, I guess, you know, or how to write one. So yeah, that's probably my contribution to that question.
Love that, Sam. Yeah, it makes me think of Jack Spicer. Do you know the poet, American poet? The 1950s likened it, writing poetry, to be like tuning in a radio, that you were just trying to pick up frequencies, and that was your job. He also likened it to receiving messages from aliens, but it's a little wild. But yeah, I love that. I think you're absolutely get out of the way of the poem. Yeah.
I like both of those. They're not so wild in my cosmos. So.
Thank you. I also see like there's a question from the audience, Leslie. He asked about, do you have any writing exercises like playing with words or images and not trying to make a poem or any part of one? I mean, or maybe like Leslie, if you would like to kind of clarify or explain a bit about what you would like to. Or anyone?
Hi. Yeah, so what I mean is just kind of sitting down and maybe playing with words, wanting to do some kind of writing, but not directing it toward writing a poem, not trying to make a line, but maybe taking a line and playing with the words in it in some ways. I'm always looking for more ways to play before poems.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Anyone, any of the poets seem to respond to that?
I've never been very good at metaphor, and usually when I get a metaphor in a poem, it's because somebody has either given me two things or instructions to put two things together. So there was one where we just kind of passed each other words and you ended up with two words and you had to put those together. There was another one where we you had to, in the class, we all had to write, or you know, somebody wrote on the board all kinds of different weather conditions. And so we had this big list of weather conditions, and then you had to choose a weather condition and write a love letter to it. And I wrote something and I took it to a group for feedback, and everybody said, oh yeah, I really like the way you've used the metaphor of the storm. And I went back to the teacher and went, people said da 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 da, and she went, yes. So that had been her point of the exercise. I was a bit slow on the uptake. So finding a way to generate two things and crashing them together to make a poem or a piece of writing, whatever, that can make something happen that you wouldn't get to unless you were trying to push those two things together. That's
great. Thank you. That's a good idea. I would try that as well. And another thing that I actually wonder about, it's like whether any of you would like to explain a bit about I think a lot of your of the poems that we've just listened to have to do with you know, thinking, like getting us thinking about ideas, and so, and I know that some of you also maybe have like maybe read a lot of like poetry criticisms and so on. Do you think it's, you know, how do you kind of, do you think like your literary influences, like what you've read or what you know, or maybe from workshops, whatever, like have changed the way that you write your poems? You know, like how does thinking like happen in your work? Like maybe if anyone wants to reflect on their literary influences, like, you know, I think Patrick mentioned about Lucy Brock-Boydo, or maybe, yeah, is there anything that like help you to kind of achieve some kind of breakthrough in your poetry, I guess?
It's such a big question, Danny.
Sorry, maybe too abstract.
No, I mean, I think like everything I read, I think everything I've just heard tonight will sort of go into this sort of subconscious from which things sort of pop out. I mean, like I've certainly done, to go back to Leslie's question, a lot of my play with words tends to be with existing works, be it books of philosophy, be it other poets, be it novelists, all that sort of thing. I love intertextual play, erasures, stealing lines, twisting them, doing them backward. The metaphor thing I really loved. Timothy Donnelly, who taught me at Columbia, used to do this exercise in which we would take familiar phrases, familiar idioms, and just like, I don't know, a bird in the hand, and you would have to then do it really literally. So a corvid in the space of one's extremities on their arms is as good as, you know, and mess around with them so that it makes you think about these sort of strange idioms and phrases that we have in English and all languages, and twist them around so that suddenly you realize how the material, I think, of language, that's like Sam's poem with the etymologies. I love digging into these sort of roots of language, that, you know, getting your hands dirty with what language is made out of and the sounds, all of those sorts of things. And so I think every time I read someone else's work, I'm engaging with all of these different aspects of it, and they tend to make me think about whole new vast openings within the back of language, I guess, that I wasn't aware of. And so yeah, so that was maybe a bit of both questions. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really helps us.
So I realize I'm in the dark here. I'm sort of looming. It got really dark here all of a sudden.
It looks good though. You're very well lit.
I think what Patrick was just saying there is very interesting, and how, you know, you just get influenced by everything you read. But the thing that always worries me, as someone who's trying to create words, is the limitation of my own mind, the limitation of my own photographic lens. And this is what interests me greatly. So, you know, I'm looking around, taking this stuff in, but it's very much still limited by, you know, my mind. So my big thing at the moment is how can I make my mind bigger? I know that sounds quite a challenge, but for example, just on a point there, that, you know, for example, I'm fascinated by the way lots of poets can approach something. Somebody can produce a very finely worded poem. It can be beautifully polished, beautiful, but at core, it's simply just a rant. It's a playground rant, or it's a revenge poem. So what sort of intrigues me is how you can have these sort of very basic, like childlike impulses, but you can change these up so much by all sorts of different techniques. But then you could question yourself, is the childish impulse, is that enough? Is that sufficient? Should we be trying to do something grander? I don't know. But anyway, I think it all comes to this sort of focus and and somehow trying to get out of one's own focus, which is a kind of a between thing anyway, like the theme tonight, sort of putting some space between the I or the mind and something else, and trying to access that.
Just to follow on from that, Katie, it's often a tension between those two impulses to expand beyond yourself and also to dig deeper within your own experience and kind of your own perspective, and find a fuller articulation of that expression as well, and then see where the intersections between those two kind of you know, almost opposing directions, you know, where they meet. And something I always try to encourage is make sure you're in your poetry, you know, and I don't mean like make it all about you, but the things that interest you, the things, you know, because that's what's going to be interesting to the reader. And, you know, embrace your strengths. So if that's music, you know, you've got an advantage there. So, you know, make your poetry very musical. If it's, you know, if you're a visual artist, then, you know, let that expression come through the poetry. You know, musicians practice scales, they practice, you know, the kind of the theoretical side of things, they practice improvisation. Poets, we're interested in language, and we're interested in the world and feelings, and, you know, and psychology. So kind of going into all of that and developing, you know, gradually developing your own articulation is what makes, I think, people interested in what you've got to say about the everyday mundane world around us. And then on a I think that hopefully will have answered Leslie and Jenny's question, but I just wanted to also comment on one of your poems, Katie. So I came into poetry really as a lyricist and a hip hop rapper, and to get good at it, you really need to study the great rappers before you, and it's a very boring, laborious job of breaking down their rhyming patterns, their rhyming sequences, the internal rhymes, the external rhymes, you know, and just the structure of it. And I've taken that into poetry. So, you know, if I read a really interesting poem, I'll copy it out and let that seep into the subconscious. And I found that very useful. But one of your poems was, you know, would have been the envy of many rappers. You know, the half rhymes and the circularity of the rhythm was really impressive. And actually, a lot of poets don't embrace some of that, some of the counterculture, you know, the punk and you know, the lyricism in popular music, in hip hop. There's some really advanced techniques to be absorbed. But yeah, I was really impressed with that poem from a rapper's perspective. It was really, really good.
Yeah, that's really like such helpful advice. Kind of like makes me think like I'm in a poetry workshop, kind of getting all the ideas how to write well. I also, yeah, there's just thing like also wanted to mention Alice's comment on the chat about you know, her response to these poems and mentioning about politically and intellectually and emotionally engaging. And I think I really agree with her. Like, I think many of, you know, all your poems, there's this element of being politically and intellectually engaged, but then at the same time, not losing us in terms of the emotional connection or the honesty of feelings. That's really hard. And I wonder if sometimes if you reflect on your creative writing process, was that, you know, how do you kind of acquire that sort of intuitive language? Is it kind of, do you edit it quite a bit, or is it really quite an organic process, like just talent? Or any or quick comment maybe? Do you think, like, your best poems, I mean, some of Patrick's poems just now, like, feels so intuitive, like, does that, the kind of process of, you know, how do you achieve that voice? Or...
I really don't know. I mean, on the political front, I think writing poetry today, now in this world, is automatically a political act, you know, to celebrate the self, to write about the emotions, singular experiences, things that are not priceable and not sort of valuable in our current sort of very capitalist, very money-driven society, is a political statement. So poetry on its own, I think, is automatically political. As far as the politics, I mean, I think in some ways to write poetry and to think about things in that way, you have a political stance in some a kind of political investment. If you're writing poetry, I mean, chances are you're not a politician. Or, you know, I mean, maybe politicians do, but I feel like there's got to be some interesting tension going on in their lives. I mean, there's tension in all our lives, but as far as how you sort of, I don't know, I think for me, it's always getting down to the particulars, finding that sort of, I guess it goes back to how you go about writing, which is finding that way in, that hook, that sort of singular image, that thing that you can latch onto. Sometimes it's political overtly, other times it's subliminally political. But yeah, I don't know. And I guess maybe going to what Sam was saying about being interested in things, I think I always tell my students, it's like, it doesn't matter how much you've read, but what matters is how interested you are in things. Be interested in things, be obsessive. I think that's brilliant. And so I'm obsessed with mucking around with language, but if your obsession is music, if it's rap, if it's whatever, you can make poetry out of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
You talked about the process, and I think the two of my poems that I'm most proud of writing came about really differently. One of them just came in about the 3 minutes it took to write it down, and I barely changed it since that first draft. It was just right, and that, you know, feels like a gift. And then the other poem is one where I slaved over every line, if not every word. I did tons of research to get it right, and I feel very proud of that, because the amount of effort that went into it. So they're complete opposites, and yet I feel the same pride in both of them.
That's really encouraging to know. Thank you.
Which poem? Did you read?
Yeah.
Did you read the poem?
I didn't read either of them.
I'm now curious.
But if you look on my website, they're both on there on the online page. The one that came as a gift is called Another Life, and that was published on Proletarian Poetry. And there are actually two that fit the other category. One of them is called My Girl, and the other one is called Ending It. And I think you can find them both on my website. JillAbram.co.uk.
Yeah.
That's really great to hear, Jill. I just wanted to say quick, that's wonderful. Things arriving as a gift. Wow, brilliant. Thanks, Sam, for those kind remarks. And I wanted just a very fast follow-up on what Patrick was saying about being curious or being obsessive. And I think for me, that's absolutely key. I think to set out to try and discover something, so that I think if what you've written ends up surprising you, so that it's not tied, that you're not setting out to, I'm writing a poem about a table and you're just trying to make it really pretty and, you know, with a little bit of something interesting thrown in. That's great. Of course, that's great to do that. But I think what's fabulous is if in the process of doing that, you just go deeper and deeper and deeper, and then ping, there's this really strange discovery. And for all of us, those will be different levels, different types of discovery, and it'll lead to different forms of poems and so on and so forth. But that setting out to kind of surprise yourself, I think is perhaps maybe the most, well, for me, probably the most important thing.
Brilliant.
Yes, absolutely. Want to second that. That was, yeah, the first poem that I read. The ending actually came because I was right. I had the idea and had these lines sort of rattling around, and I wrote most of the poem sort of in one go. And I realized I was actually kneeling on the floor with my hands on the bed as if I were praying. And when I realized that, I realized that's how the poem has to end. And that surprise, that discovery in a poem, that's what, I don't know, that's what I do it for, maybe, is that realization, that discovery.
Totally. And I think this comes back to the question about, well, ties together the questions about literary criticism and where we place ourselves in the canon, as a kind of an era of poets in this time, and what that means politically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. And, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't feel like there's been a definition of what's going on right now in poetry, but it seems as if, particularly in the last 10 years or so, with the seismic shifts and changes in consciousness around the world, and the increasing acknowledgement that things aren't working for the vast majority of people in one way, shape or another, and that things do need to change to make a fairer, more equitable existence for the planet, the species, and everything else that lives alongside us. That poets are kind of a bit of a mouthpiece for that, you know, and almost, you know, in this crazy teleological age that we live in, where we're all searching for purpose, and it, you know, the upside of that is are these kind of conversations and these communities that are being built around the world, whether it be through creative processes or community building initiatives. You know, there's some really interesting poetry emerging that takes the craft of the poem seriously, but also wants to say something and say something constructive about the world. And it feels as if, you know, the establishment are very much aware of that, and, you know, hence why we've got such a hard time with Arts Council, well, with the arts being underfunded, and, you know, youth centres being closed all over the country, where, you know, young people would have had an opportunity to be engaged and to find their voice. And yeah, it feels like something's going on. I can't really put I can't articulate it well enough, but I think we all feel it anyway, and COVID's brought that to the forefront, really. So yes, political poetry, you know, that isn't soapbox kind of polemical nonsense, but I think we all can sense that we're at a critical juncture in history, and, you know, this is one of the few safe spaces to explore that, you know, where you can observe and reflect and comment and share and find a community, you know, and build on that. And I think I'm very interested to know, you know, how history will review the efforts of poets, you know, in this time. We don't have a label. We're not the modernists. We're not the postmodernists, or you know, this isn't the romantic period. But there'll be a name for what's happening now in context of the history that unfolds as we speak. And it you know, there's a kind of a humility and a shyness to pin ourselves to anything. I think, you know, it's part of our common culture, but it's happening. You know, there's the poems read by every single one of the poets today just, you know, shook me to the core, and were incredibly political, just in the essence of them being written, and that seems to be happening a lot more now than it did when I first started attending readings. So it does feel an honor, really, to be part of this broader acceptance of the role of the poet as something more than just, you know, like Katie described, you know, writing about tables, you know, unless the table sits in a broader metaphor, you know, that can reach out to people and touch them when they need to be, and people need to be engaged and need to feel like, you know, we're here, we see the same things, we feel the same things, and we acknowledge you. And through that process find some purpose for our own journey through this madness.
I think, yeah, I agree with you very much, Sam. Thanks for that. Like this idea of this balance between humility and at the same time wisdom or intelligence of the poems. And it kind of also reminds me that, like, some people saying that if you publish a pamphlet or a collection, it shouldn't be just to show off how many forms you've known, or, you know, like that I can write a sonnet and a hassal and all that. And it's like, you know, having something to say, or having your own original voice and engagement with things. So yeah, that's brilliant. And so I think, like, I was just like, as usually what we wanted to also ask the poets is like whether you're reading anything interesting as well, and, you know, maybe can kind of share with us a glimpse of your poetry books and share, or, you know, whatever that interests you most at the moment. Anyone feels like going first, please feel free. And also, may I also continue to remind everyone, if you haven't got these poets' collections and books and pamphlets yet, please do so, you know, and do check out their work. You know, they're brilliant, as you can see for yourself. It's really, Jill, would you like to start first and kick us off with a few books?
Well, I have read very little in the last year and a half. I've had real trouble concentrating. Most of the books I've read have been books that I had to read because I was going to be presenting an event on them, and this was the most recent of those. It's Joanne Lindbergh's Letters to My Weird Sisters, because I presented her launch. She's a poet as well, but this is a non-fiction, and it's letters to, she's autistic, and she's found women in history who are, she describes as weird, who might have been autistic. You can't diagnose people posthumously. And so she's written letters to them that allow her to talk about herself and about autism in general, as well as the people she's addressed it to. The book I'm currently reading, Kai Miller, Things I Have Withheld. It's his most recent book of essays. He, of course, is a poet. And the book that I haven't dared read any of the poems. This is the Malika's Kitchen 20th anniversary anthology. It's got mostly new poems by more than 60 members of our family, the Kitchen family, over the last 20 years. And it's edited by two of our members, Rishi Dastidar, the new Costa Poetry Award judge, and Maisie Lawrence. And the history in it was written by Daniel Cram, The History of Kitchen, and Malika's written a foreword and a guide to setting up your own kitchen. And those 3 pieces made me cry so much that I haven't dared read the poems, but you should.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's brilliant. Not to be missed. Anyone? Sam? Or any recommendations or anything that you've read recently? Or...
Quite shamefully, I've not been reading much.
Don't worry.
I bought a whole bunch of books that I'm looking forward to getting into once I finish my.
Yeah, you're doing PhD. Yeah, I can totally understand.
There's a lot of reading, but it's all incredibly boring and not very soul fulfilling. But I will get round to reading a whole bunch of books, including the Kitchen Anthology, which I have and looks great. And Nee Parks's book, The Geek. I read the first poem of that collection while I was in the Waterstones, and it really nearly made me cry. So I thought, well, I need to be in a time when I've not got a whole bunch of other work pressures before I start reading that, because that will send me down a quite an interesting rabbit hole. But I'd love to hear what Patrick and Katie are reading now. And anyone else, actually, if anybody else has got any really good recommendations, that'd be really, really useful.
Patrick, do you?
Well, I'm the new term is about to begin, so I'm rereading books that I'm teaching and things like that, and I'm also in the middle of doing psychology studies. My work at the university, my research involves psychology, language psychology, so I've been reading tons of like really, really dry psychology papers on experiments on like how language processing works. Jill, on metaphors for you, all about how metaphors work in the brain, which is really interesting, but somehow scientists can make it really dull. Otherwise, I'm bouncing around between lots of other books. I'm finding with the way things are currently, I leap from books to books. I've just got shelves of things that I'll read parts of, put down, leave for a while, come back to. Let's say, like, I'm excited about starting is, and to plug a friend's book, is my friend Rosa Campbell just released a book with Broken Sleep called Pothos, which before it got dark in here, you could see I've got a pothos plant on my shelf. And it seems a phenomenal book. I'm very excited to read that. Otherwise, I've been reading Dan Beachy Quick's poetry, American poet, really interesting, fun sort of play with language stuff. Shane McRae, another American poet. Yeah.
That's brilliant. No, that's totally understandable. I know how the pressure of teaching myself. Yeah, like looking forward to reading your new poems as well, and lots of them online and also in other print magazines. I really love that. And Katie, do you have anything that you wanted to?
Yeah, I've got, well, I think like everybody, reading. I've been dipping into quite a few things. So Jill will know this because Malika Booker sings the praises of this poet, Valentina Mort. This is an stunning book. I love her style. She's stunning to me in the way that Ilya Kaminsky is stunning. I'm just going through these quickly because I know the time. I've been dipping into This Alive by Liesl Müller, and I find her extraordinary in her just ranging over sort of daily life and things in daily life, and her sort of turns these into symphonies and concertos. She deals a lot with music as well, which I like. Just started looking at Terminarchy by Angela France, the new one out from Nine Arches Press. I think very much. I think I'm going to really enjoy it as a collection for this moment. But the book I'm really excited about, it's not a book of poetry. And I think this goes back to, you know, what Sam was talking about, really. This is a book, it's called, and it's by a Scottish real intellect called David Lorimer, who is a prodigious reader, is a polymath, and he is terribly interested in the interface between science and consciousness, and what is consciousness and purpose in life. And he's absolutely fascinating. And I've just recently acquired his book, and it's all about purpose in life, as I say, perception. So it's really, really interesting.
That's brilliant. Oh, thank you so much, Katie. Lots to catch up on for us then. So with this, I just wanted to thank everyone, and thank you all the our brilliant feature poets today for your, just kind of really awe-inspiring poems, and that gets us to think so much about, what poetry means, and also what places mean to us, and how you kind of navigate all these places and spaces and time in your, like, I remember it's still someone's poem on my mind about what you do with a lifetime and all that. So I really, lots to think about, and I just hope that you've enjoyed it also, and thank you again. So I look forward to seeing you in our next reading. And meanwhile, just be, I hope you have a good evening. And, thank you very much for sharing the time and space today. So let's give a big clap to all the poets, if you'd like to. Thank you. So thank you again. And thanks, Patrick, Katie, Sam, Jill. Do buy their books, remember. And so I think our next reading is going to happen on the 11th of October on Monday evening. And we have Hannah Lowe, Anna Selby, Richard Scott, and Will Harris. So look forward to sharing more details with you next time. Take care, everyone, and have a good evening where you are. Bye.
Are you going to leave it?
Yeah.
Stay in the Zoom for a minute. Great.
I have to probably turn off quite soon.
Stop the recording.
Stop the recording.